RPSM Talks.
RPSM Talks?
RPSM Talks.
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 I'm Thompson, Egbo-Egbo. It's my pleasure to be here for our 10th installment. Tonight's topic is navigating uncertainty in the arts. We're 2 years into the pandemic and we realize there's a lot of fatigue. However, we've learned a lot about ourselves and about each other, and how caring professionals can really help us really kind of navigate the difficult times that we're all kind of in, and every one of us is dealing with this differently. For some of us, it's been tough. For others, it's been a different issue. Some people have breezed through it. So we wanted to kind of just give each other space to really kind of delve into it, learn about some of the really great nuances that have happened, but also some of the things that happened not just because of the pandemic, but in life as you kind of go through the motions. And I think what's great about where we are right now is that we're all kind of collectively going through different things in the moment. And so it's nice for us to find kind of the resources and tools that will help us figure this out together. To get the stage started, we've got a little video put on by the Toronto Foundation's Vital Signs. This is part of their report for 2020. And for anyone who wants to look it up, Jasper will put the link in the chat, but we're going to start with the video there. Great. And once again, Jasper will have the link to the full report in the chat. One of the things that jumped out to me was, how we can do better. And one of those things is to listen to community experts. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start with Kathryn Hummel from Unison Fund, which is actually, for me, really great because Unison Fund has been there. They've been there before the pandemic. They'll be here after. And it'd be great just to kind of learn about some of the resources that they have put together for artists. And, as I mentioned earlier, obviously there are things that have been challenges that have been happening, but these are also challenges I think that people go through throughout their life. One of the unique things about right now is some of the same things that are impacting all of us are kind of maybe not impacting us the same way, but we're all being impacted and affected by it. So it'd be great to kind of just learn about Unison. So please let us know about that. But then also it'd be great to understand just, what have been some of the opportunities and I guess silver linings to some of the things that the pandemic has brought us, but what have also been some of the challenges. And I think how do some of those challenges relate to things that are really ongoing things that, artists and musicians have to deal with and address, and potentially new things, the added weight to what else has been going on.
Well, I guess we could start with just a little bit about the organization. And thanks so much for having me on this evening. For those that aren't familiar with Unison, we are a not-for-profit organization that was started in 2011, specifically created as a safety net for the music industry. As some people on this Zoom may or may not realize that, working in the music industry, there typically isn't any type of insurance or safety net. Reality, a lot of people work from paycheck to paycheck. And so that was one of the main purposes why this organization was created in the first place, and specifically to be a lifeline for our industry. So my role at the organization is manager of allocations and services. So I oversee all of our financial assistance programs as well as our counseling services. So I definitely can speak to the impact the pandemic has had, because I am the front line, as well as a couple of colleagues of mine that deal with the day-to-day communications for the organization, specifically for the financial programs, like I said. And so if you have any questions about that, I'll be sticking around. I can speak further to that. And then, I think some of the silver lining in this is definitely cracking open some of the conversations about mental health and wellness. Obviously, we've been a big champion in that. I have also personally and professionally, I have my own artist management and marketing company on the side also that I've run for the last 20 years. And over the last 10 years, have really tried to do diligence in the type of work and messaging that I'm putting out there, not only in my personal, but professional life and just in the Canadian community as a whole. I think prior to the pandemic, and especially now, burnout is definitely a very hot topic that didn't get discussed as openly as it is now. And so having the resource that we can now offer to our industry is crucial, but more so just creating relationships with allies and getting that messaging out there that, that your mental health and your wellness is top priority, and above all, that we are there to support that, but also that, our industry is a safe space to start talking about that and creating change within our Canadian community, because now more than ever, I think everybody realizes or has had a lot of time to reflect on what's truly important in our lives. And definitely I can speak to that personally, that more than ever, my wellness is top priority.
Awesome. You talked about some of the things that, pension and different things like that artists don't generally have. It's some of the things that if you had a regular job, if you're working at the bank, there's a host of things that would kind of just come as a staple with
Benefits.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what are some of those things that I think Unison tries to help fill the gaps? We know that there are, if you're part of certain unions, sometimes there's some of those things come along with that as well. But what are some of those other resources?
Well, first and foremost, our financial program is definitely really crucial piece that we're obviously offering right now. It has changed and evolved throughout the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, it basically facilitated the purpose that if somebody needed like dental surgery or, over and above, types of services that they probably couldn't afford out of pocket or surgery or what have you, that we were there to support that. We don't necessarily offer like ongoing repeat services in terms of something like a benefit package would. We do through our counseling services. We are partnered with LifeWorks, where members of Unison can access free counseling, and that doesn't necessarily have to be mental health related. It can be financial, legal, what have you. And so that's a free service. And then we do have a list of partners on our website that we also work with. Another organization called Together All. There's an online peer-to-peer support website that our members as well can access 24/7 anonymously for all kinds of topics as well. But yeah, we are meant to be a short-term resource.
Okay, wonderful.
On the financial side.
Wonderful. I know that there were resources over the past 2 years for people to apply to. How did some of those things play in? I know that clearly as artists, venues have closed, all types of venues have closed. So what have been some of the asks that have really, where Unison has been really trying to, I wouldn't say so much fill the gap, because I don't know how you fill the gap on all the venues that have really been impacted by all this, but what are some of the areas where they've really tried to at least be a bit of a buffer?
Well, I think we've just tried to really get the message out there that we exist for everyone that works in the Canadian music industry. Our only requirements is that you've worked a minimum of 2 years consecutively and make 55% of your income from the music industry. So it's definitely expanded far and wide, and we've had to reevaluate over the course of the last 2 years on exactly what that means in terms of a profession, because, we get everyone from the bus driver, of tours, to venue managers, to musicians, to classical trained, to popular music. Like, there's so many areas of the industry that's clearly affected, from catering to like every possible chain of command has been affected in some capacity. So we're just trying to get the word out there, and we just have a few basic requirements in order for people to apply, and try to make it as simple as possible and turn money around as quickly as we can so people can afford their rent and groceries and just basic living needs.
Yeah, great. Well, we've done, this is our 10th edition now of the RPSM Talks, and we've been fortunate to see people from various sides of the industry. So, along with that, I'm curious as to, you've mentioned some roles. What have been kind of some of the, some of it is obvious, but I am just asking you just for that elimination of where are the roles that have kind of been impacted the most? Like, it's easy to sort of see the performer on stage, obviously, because their venues have been taken. But what are some of the maybe other parts of the industry we haven't seen that have been greatly impacted, like, by this in a negative way? But also, what are some of the opportunities that have arose from what's happened?
Yeah, I guess on the negative side, there's a lot of behind the scenes people that are part of putting on a show that I don't think the general public is always aware of. Sure, you have the musician, but you also have the tour manager, you have the booking agent, you have the artist manager, you have all the venue staff. It goes far and wide in terms of the merch sellers, the publicists, the, record labels in some capacity as well. But yeah, I would say our highest volume of applicants have definitely been musicians, DJs, technicians, staging, lighting, anyone that really predominantly solely relies on income from a live show. So when you think of when you go into a venue and you go to see a show, every single person that is working at the front of the house, at like from security to taking your coat to your tickets, everything, every single person is affected by this right now. On the positive side, I would say it's given people a lot of time to reevaluate what's important, of course. Speaking to the mental health piece of it, I think there's been a lot of movement happening in terms of what's considered, sort of an old guard of sorts on terms of, that you have to hustle and you have to grind it out and you have to constantly be working all the time, that people have had a minute to pause and to figure out, how do I create balance in my workload? Because back to the burnout piece, it's something that wasn't spoken about quite a bit. And that was something that I've been really passionate about because I've experienced it myself. I've toured for 15 years across the country, all over the world. I know what it's like to come home from those experiences. And so I think there's been room to figure out, how do we come back from this? How do we, create spaces for people to do this type of work in a healthier manner? Like that you don't need to, maybe start your morning at 5 a.m. and constantly go till 2 a.m., like that, creating space, like even for myself, when I do scheduling for artists that are on radio tours and things, like having an hour for actually lunch to stop and like just decompress for a minute. That kind of stuff wasn't always a high priority. And now people actually having those grander conversations that like, okay, yes, it's going to be stressful trying to come back from this and get back into the rhythm of things. People are feeling a lot of pressure on body image, all kinds of things when it comes to getting back out there because everybody's just been home. But I think there's a lot more room and safe spaces for conversations of what people need. And also, like, the positivity is a lot of people have been creating a lot. They've had time to create. They've had time to collaborate. They've had time to maybe get on Zoom calls with people who traditionally they wouldn't have gotten time with because they didn't physically have the opportunity to go somewhere internationally or what have you. So I think there's definitely a lot of silver lining from this experience. And that's where I'm trying to also lend, put my head at, and especially with the new year, is just what can we take out of this that is positive, that there is a lot of things that we've learned and adjusted and prioritized, and that some of the artists that I work with outside of Unison have written the most music they have in the last 2 years and have recorded and done all kinds of things and collaborated more than they ever would have had the opportunity to prior. And I think we're just overall learning how to do business differently and, do I dare say, pivot.
Well, it's interesting you say do business differently. I know that my own trio, my drummer and my bass player, it's what's happened over the last 2 years has impacted them in different ways. And from a financial standpoint, one is in a sort of a better place than the other. So they kind of came in almost with a buffer. So I guess, for me, one of the things I think about is like, how do you prepare? It's not necessarily for the next pandemic, but how do you prepare for the next time you may lose income that you're not, or the way you're currently making your income is taken away from you, not for any reason that you're able to control. So it could be something as simple as, hey, maybe you just, you got sick, or, for whatever reason you're unable to travel. Or how do you now, because these are things that, although the pandemic has forced that, but that there's other reasons why that could happen to someone. And so I guess the question is, from everything that you've seen, or how people are addressing this, are now, what are some of the strategies people might be in placing, or some of the strategies you might think of for the next time there comes a situation where you may not be able to do it the way you're doing it right now. So for me, for instance, obviously I'm performing. I'm fortunate I get to write and do some other things, but what happens if I can't get on the road or get into the club? So now I've got to think about some of those other opportunities that are maybe still in music, maybe it's something else, and how to address that, pivot to it very quickly, as opposed to, I think, maybe what some of us did was, 2 weeks, great, I can wait 2 weeks. And
nobody expected it this long.
Yeah. And even when you
Yeah.
talk about the, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Even when you talk about all the music that people have created, I think that first 4 months, I created a lot of music. And then it's sort of like, oh, wait a minute, we're not changing out of this. So there was definitely a decline in that productivity. And so, so just, I guess I'm asking just kind of maybe some of the strategies you might employ, but maybe some of the things you've seen people who came into this and that were able to kind of weather the storm a little better, and what some of those reasons might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a case by case and an individual scenario, depending on where you live, so many layers, but definitely within my circle, I've seen people adjust in terms of focusing, say, maybe on writing. A client of mine was fortunate enough to get a publishing deal. So for them, they were able to generate secure, regular income from that versus predominantly most of their income coming from live. I think people have just been sort of forced to get creative if they have the bandwidth. Like you said, the first 4 months, people were doing all the baking, they're doing the right, whatever they had the capacity at the time. And then, some of that came to a grinding halt. So I think definitely still comes down to the mental health piece. Some people are still figuring it out, and some people either have the resources or connections to be savvy in terms of what they're doing. I mean, I'm trying to think of some scenarios, like definitely releasing more music online, like finding other ways to generate revenue. Thankfully, there's been a lot of funding available. Obviously, Unison is still available, but none of those are really sustainable things. I think some of it really just comes back to people diving into other skill sets they have, and if they are able to generate some sort of revenue from that. I've definitely seen people who've had to get jobs outside of the industry altogether just because all they've done is play music their whole lives and they don't know what else to do. Or I've seen other people start new companies or collaborate with other organizations. Obviously, a lot of people did online live streams and found ways to generate revenue around that. But I wish I had more of a clear-cut answer to what somebody has figured out to do in a long-term versus, because I think it's just something any creative person really is always trying to figure out, is how do you generate multiple revenue streams? Because if it's not important now, it definitely or wasn't before, it definitely is more than ever, that if you choose to get into a creative career choice, that you do need to diversify.
I think that's a big piece, right? Which is looking at, I guess, putting all your eggs in one basket. But it's not just that. It's that what are the different ways the same creative output can really generate an income for you? And so how do you diversify some of those opportunities and interests? And really, it's not necessarily creating more work, which you should be doing anyways. I shouldn't say you should be, but which is still possible. But what are the different applications? And I know through the different talks we've had, people who are doing sync work and things like that. So there are different applications for where your music can live and sit that would open up new revenue streams for you, which might.
Or you can use that music, obviously, right? And then just all the different avenues online offers. Or, if you were doing an in-person business, how much of that can be adapted online? And can you move to a hybrid model? Or are there other services that you could offer? Like another client of mine who definitely, again, focused mostly on live, but now is mentoring because they've been doing it for 15, 20 years. And and they're in a position where they feel like they can offer younger artists. And like, I think you just kind of have to tap into your experiences and see if there's an opportunity to charge for it.
That's great. The I guess I'm also curious, like there are clearly different things we can sort of look to be doing. You create multiple whatever revenue streams, the input of the work. There's also the what I've seen, and I guess also have gone through as an artist, which is like the motivation to get to that point, right? Which is, again, we talked about sort of the beginning of this where it looked like, oh, great, this is just kind of a reset. We'll hang out for a couple of weeks and then get back to it, and then it sort of settles in. And so now I'm finding the strength, the motivation, depending on what's happening. Like, because also it's not just what's happening, what's impacting you, but what's also impacting the people around you. So the would have been potentially maybe things for people to do, like, is it getting a buddy, are you looking, I guess there's different degrees of the type of support you might need to be creative, or to like now come to the realization that, hey, the way you've done it may just not work, at least in the short term, but maybe for a much longer period than you expected. What have you seen in terms of, and I don't want to say so much what have you seen, but what are some of the resources that people have kind of are reaching out for, or now looking for, that maybe Unison has always provided, or maybe there's new asks of some of the people in the membership that now are saying, hey, before this wasn't a thing that we needed, but because of how things have changed in the last 2 years, this is now a resource that we really kind of need this type of support.
I think it's a little divided. I'm definitely finding, and if you asked me this question now versus a few months ago, if different periods over the last 2 years, I think I still, to be quite frank, people are still in like survival mode, right? And so it's just like, what can I do to make sure that I can afford my next month's bills and food and things like that? So I'm finding that not a lot of people are thinking past that, and or are actually speaking up for needing more access to counseling. And so that's conversations that are happening more about what we offer, or who we can recommend, or who we're partnered with and things like that, and or if there's over and above resources. In terms of, like, we do regular blogs where we create a lot of resource, or where we provide different resources and tips and get industry partners or community members to put their input for people to go. But I think a lot of it is still, everybody's just trying to get through it and come out the other side. So if anything, I think a lot of people are just pausing and taking a moment to breathe and just figure out how they're going to survive and mentally handle the next little while, and tap into some of the resources that we offer through that.
Perfect. The before I move on, I do want to ask, because we always try to get a little bit of everyone's journey, because we've had so many people come from different parts of the industry, and so can you tell us a little bit about what your musical journey has been like, and how that gets you to where you are now? Or maybe it doesn't, maybe it just you fall into it a little bit, but I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, no, I definitely realized early on that the arts was where I wanted to be. I tried to rear from that path a little bit, but I actually grew up in Toronto, and I went to a couple art schools for elementary school and high school. And my mom worked in a Etobicoke School for the Arts. And so arts has always sort of been around me. But when I originally went to school for child and youth work, so I did work in social services before I got into music, but through that, I still found I was being pulled back to music. I was during high school and into, early 20s, I was always a part of the club scene in Toronto. I helped promote events and did different things. And I found that through my work in social services, that I always had a love for music and how it influenced therapy. And I was using it in some group therapy that I was doing at the time. And then from that, I realized that that wasn't a long-term path for me, that industry, and that somehow I wanted to find my way back to music. And through doing that, I could sort of find a parallel between my want to help people, but potentially on a grander scale, because I truly believe that music can, reach a mass, a lot more people than the current path I was on at the time. And so in my early 20s, I left that one career and decided to find a way to start my own business. And I was at the time still promoting events and doing, monthly events and club dates and things in the city. And I went back to school for entertainment business management at Metalworks in Mississauga. And I was one of the first 4 students to start in their entertainment business program. And through that time, I decided, well, it was a good opportunity to just put my head down, put together a business plan, and really zone in on what I wanted to do, because I always had a knack and an interest in managing and developing artists, and sort of found I was already naturally doing that with some people that were coming into my space. I graduated from there and I worked for Canadian Music Week. I interned and then got hired on, and while I was developing my company on the side. And one of the first artists that I managed during that time, they were a rock band called Red Light Riot. And as most bands do, they broke up, but happy to report that the guitar player went on to play for Prince, and the bass player plays for Thornley. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. And so I actually, once I left Canadian Music Week, I worked at Factor. For those that aren't familiar with, is a national funding organization for the arts as well, and continued there for about a year, and decided, well, this type of corporate job wasn't for me, that I wanted to try my hand at going back to running my company full time. And I left there and said to myself, okay, give myself a year. If I can make more money than I was at this job, then I'm on to something. If not, then I have to reevaluate. Shortly after leaving Factor, a few clients that I'd met through Factor phoned me up and said, hey, want to keep in touch. Can we work together? And one of the other bands that I actually ended up having 15-year career with was a band called Hey Romeo. They're a country group from Alberta. And I started working with them in about 2008, and we went on to travel the world. We won lots of awards together. The last major tour we did was with Alan Jackson Arena Tour across Canada. And from there, I just managed a few artists and developed them over the years. I had a sprinkling of other sort of side work. I did a small stint as festival director at Indie Week. I also joined with Royalty Records about 9 years ago on a contract basis, and then grew into a full-time general manager role over the last few years there. While I was managing a couple of the artists that were on the label. And then through that experience, I landed myself doing contract work for Unison about 3 years ago, when I was really diving into my passion for health and wellness in the music industry. And from there, I just started helping represent the organization at different industry events and speaking about mental health, and contributing to their blog, and helping set up wellness events and things at different conferences. And then 2 years at the beginning of the pandemic, I left Royalty and joined on with Unison. And now I'm down to one management client and one consulting client. And last year I had 5. And now I'm full-time with Unison as of, I guess, March last year.
Amazing.
That's it in a bit of a nutshell.
Yeah, cool. Well, keeping up with the theme of diversifying, so that's pretty awesome. Well, thanks so much. We're gonna make sure that we come back to you for questions at the end. I'm gonna shoot over to some of our other guests to kind of just continue this conversation with us. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate you kind of speaking on Unison's behalf. I know they're doing such great work and really important for artists and musicians alike and their journey and really just supporting them. So it's been great. I am going to actually introduce our next two guests who are community experts. As we mentioned in that video from Toronto Vital Signs, how really it's great to kind of look at the experts and ask them what they're seeing and understand. And we have with us today Greg Leslie, who is an educator, a social advocate, social worker who supports youth and families across Toronto, but more specifically in the Black Creek area and Jane and Finch communities. So welcome, Greg. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yeah, along with Greg, we also have Amanda Blair Roberson, who's here representing the SAD Collective. And the SAD Collective describes themselves as a community who firmly believes in vulnerability. They believe in the freedom of crying and in the strength of admitting we're not always okay. And sometimes we need where it's okay to say you're not fine and encourage people to seek support when they need it. So the SAD Collective strives to be a safe, emotional space to express yourself. They hope to become a catalyst for conversation with the goal of bringing mental health to the forefront of social consciousness. So thank you both. Welcome to you. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll tell just for, people tuning in, we had this talk booked to kind of just have a talk with Unison around mental health, being an artist, and how all those things kind of play into each other. And then right before, or I guess at the new year, the lockdowns were announced again. And I said to Jasper, I said, we know that we're not hearing enough of voices from the youth, so we're not really understanding. We're seeing how the pandemic is impacting a lot of different demographics, and there really hasn't been as much of a focus on how some of the children and youth have been dealing and addressing this. So I really wanted to bring the both of you on, and just to kind of really man, we said in your bios, just let people know, hey, we've all dealt with this really differently in different ways. It's okay if it's been a little tough on you, and there hasn't been necessarily a space for everyone to kind of go through that. And I'd love to kind of just understand really from the both of you what you're seeing through your work. Again, I think for everything, it's not all doom and gloom. I think there have been some positives that have happened through this, but I think there's also been some challenges. And it'd be great to just kind of really just help the students understand, what some of those challenges are, some of the things maybe they think they're going through on their own, and where some of the resources that they can look to support them. I didn't direct that to anybody, but Greg, I'll start with you just to let us introduce yourself first of all, and tell us about some of the work you've been doing.
Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you guys all for having me and giving the opportunity to speak to youth, and for youth to have an opportunity to hear their voices echoed. I'm not going to suggest that I'm speaking for all of you, but just trying to represent what I hear and what I deal with in my work. I just wanted to start by kind of laying the context by saying COVID has been associated with fear, uncertainty, mental health, physical health, and most importantly, death, right? And stress and anxiety. So with that, through my work in working with youth, specifically school-age youth who are impacted, education has been at the mercy of technology, meaning that youth are having to, based on their access to a device, they have to be educated on their phone, on their tablet, on their laptop, and all of those different devices create their own challenges based on access to internet. And some of the things that, ways that they're impacted, for example, are if they live in a building and people are working from home in that building, the internet is far more slower than usual, right? So they're dealing with it crashing, having to not being able to have access to more than one devices. So in turn, they're not getting educated the way that they want. And even when they are, they're either having to watch a video for the class that they've missed or not getting the attention needed to kind of learn in the way that they would used to if they were in a face-to-face opportunity. So as a result, there's a lot of disparities around learning and how they learn. And in situations like that, there is no one really holding them accountable, because at the time that they're in school, they're in a space where their parents now have to be their principal as well as their parent. So I think relationships change, the way they socialize changes, right? So I think it just creates a lot of different avenues around socialization and education and public and personal health. So I think the difficulty is being able to self-regulate and navigate themselves as they learn, right? So those challenges are different for each person, because some individuals are visual learners. Some are able to kind of just learn on their own just by being able to read a lesson, right? So the opportunity to learn is very different. And no one is really getting the opportunity to hear them, because one minute we're going to school, the next minute we're not. And the next minute we don't have enough teachers to have access to education the way that they were hoping to, right? So I think it's no fault of their own if they're not having academic success the way that they would. And in turn, it impacts their stress and their ability to cope, really. So it's not one thing. I think it's a barrage of things, and they're sometimes left to figure it out on their own. Because I could speak for myself, when I was going to school, I couldn't bring my math lesson to my mom. She would be like, what fraction, what X equals this, right? So I think the reality is youths are left to their own demise and learn, right? So I think having a good cohort of friends and having the ability to keep each other accountable is truly important. And not everybody has access to that. Having an older brother or sister might be beneficial because they may have gone through that process already, so they're easier able to help you. So I think there's no easy answer. It's really based upon the individual and how determined they are to have academic success on their own personal journey to be educated. So that's what I would kind of say about that in a nutshell.
It's it's interesting you say that. I know that looking at the reflections of my time in high school, there was work to rule, so they stopped all the extracurricular, and obviously most extracurricular stuff is not happening now. I remember my basketball team, a big percentage of them dropped out of school when they did that. Some never returned, and so I know that's happening across the city. I've heard numbers as high as 20,000, kids who they've seen maybe once online and never saw again, or just never showed up. And so the peer group and sort of that peer accountability, well, a lot of times we think about peer pressure, but peer pressure isn't always a negative thing, right? That peer pressure to come to school, where were you? Hey, I didn't see you in class. You don't have that same community built around you and building that same support for you to get through some of those lessons and those tough times, or having somebody to even ask, like you said, if you can't go to your parents about those fractions or the chemistry, who do you go to if you're stuck at home? Amanda, I'm going to just kick to you, because I know you're doing a lot of work as well. Please introduce yourself and your work, and also I'd love to just kind of hear from the work that you've been doing, what have been because your work has actually been a bit of a response to what's happened, and it'd be great to kind of just get your lens and perspective on that.
Yeah. Also, if you see a random dog pop in and out of the screen, her name's Boba, and she hears all your voices, so she's very curious, and my apologies. So my work and my professional work, really is in the non-for-profit community youth and arts and culture sector. First it kind of was in the marketing and impact, and then when COVID hit, it really landed in this program role. Everything that our non-for-profit spaces were doing, had to be adapted to this online model. And it was a great challenge, but one of the things and one of the key learnings that really came from us, and, in developing the mental health and wellness programs that SAD Collective does, as well as, where I currently work and where I worked previously during the pandemic, was a direct response to the concept of limitations that community is facing right now. And Greg, that was kind of, what you were talking about in a different scale, but this concept of being limited and lack of access and, the silence of our emotions. We spent, this kind of, and we're still spending this time with ourselves. And, we've had 2 years with ourselves, if it is, even if it is with family, if it is alone, if it is in a co-shared space, whatever it may be, there are these constant moments where we are left in an emotional state. And I think one of the things that COVID in particular kind of exacerbated was this conversation, with what am I feeling? What am I doing with these feelings? How do I process these feelings? How do I make sense of these? And it kind of all became heightened, with just being alone in this kind of isolation. And our programming in particular was sad, and just in general was to try to at least address these conversations, because one of the things that we do as humans, and in particular when we're a lot younger, is we apologize for what we're feeling. We apologize for being angry, we apologize for being stressed. We enter a Zoom call and we might kind of yawn and we're like, I'm sorry, I'm tired. It is a natural thing to do. And when we are kind of facing these multiple pandemics, it is so easy for us to apologize for our mental state. And because of the sheer guilt that you're feeling something that you don't think you should be feeling. And, our programs and really, kind of echoing this peer support, having, a network. And, unfortunately, some of us don't have the privilege of, siblings, families, friends, and what I really think is amazing, in particular in Toronto and Ontario and Canada, is we are rapidly trying to build those resources. If you don't have them, hotlines, drop in webinars that kind of just focus on just sharing space and the concept of space. After this call, I'll send a link. I put together a list of, resources that are just free and accessible, that just kind of tackle this concept of just being able to share space. But I would really think that is, the challenge, but also that concept of, peer pressure, peer support, even, and knowing that, peer support doesn't necessarily need to be your friend group or your homies. It really is about knowing that you are in a space where people may be relatively feeling the same as you.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's the I think it's interesting because even speaking to Kathryn, like there are a lot of similarities to what many of us adults are going through right now. And again, it's interesting because those same things a lot of our students are going through. There's many adults who are doing it, who are dealing with the isolation, who are dealing, I think, with for me it's the disconnection, right? And not being connected to the same, the people you're used to being connected to, whether it's family or friends, for one reason or another. And if you're a student and you're at home and you kind of don't have those same kind of peer supports, what are some of the ways the youth in your care, I should say, are really tackling those issues? So like, what is, because again, there are various levels. It may just be simply like, I'm a little bummed out and I can't see my friend. So there's ways to deal with that. Maybe you FaceTime, but we all, I think, kids may get bored of FaceTiming their friends. We're getting the fatigue from the Zooming, and so how do you now balance that? Because I know one of the things I'm missing is a hug. I just want to hug people, and and so just that connection, which I think doesn't matter what age you are, really is something that's important. What are some really healthy ways to kind of address some of those really just basic needs?
I would say what we've done based on the youths that I have connections with is through COVID, we've done a lot of mentoring programs and creating spaces where, whether they're virtual or in person, that peer interaction, giving people the opportunity to really speak on how they're feeling. initially when COVID started, I think it's important to say that COVID is a psychological trauma based on the uncertainty. So just being able to help people understand, like, as an adult, I don't know, I'm certain, and I'm uncertain, and I'm scared. So just validating and sharing how we feel, I think is important to make the conversation easier because it's so uncertain. So what's been helpful is just really creating space, again, whether that they're virtual, and try to create some of those social interactions that really make people feel good, whether it be a virtual hug, helping to validate someone's feeling, to say, like, I understand that as well, or getting people who are taking similar classes to really come together and help each other learn together, and just really helping each other image shape reality around what we're doing as a whole, because we have to, while we're in this uncertain time, really find creative ways to be together. So what we've done is really help youth to understand time management, and the ability to use their skills and to really approach education in a different way, whether it be we offer tutoring in a lot of our programs because we realize that there's a deficit where kids aren't able to kind of get the lessons the way that they would. So just being able to offer, fill the gaps in areas that we know that they aren't able to kind of navigate on their own. Whether it be, again, as I said, tutoring, peer mentorship, having social groups where we're doing games and interacting together to really create a space that helps us to continue to socialize. As human beings, we all need that. So just really trying to create avenues virtually that kind of bring us together in a physical way, because just to learn to appreciate each other and understand that we're all kind of in this together, and we'll get through it together. And I think that's what I would share.
Yeah, and I'm gonna echo some of the same sentiments. You know, I really wish that there was this magic snap of your fingers that, you know, could resolve this, you know, the multiple pandemics. You know, I wish that, you know, it was just like that easy. And, you know, Thompson, I'll give you a virtual hug right now. And, you know, I just wanted to echo two things. You know, one, you know, in particular in community spaces, you know, the frontline workers are drastically trying to solve the problems by, you know, creating, you know, loads of programming, peer connections, support groups, conversations. And those are, you know, I think a wonderful utilized tool to just address the connection that we desperately, you know, need as humans to feel like we are seen, we are heard, we are we are understood in this moment. And I, you know, I encourage, you know, being able to kind of look out for that. And if you don't know where to look out, you know, reaching out to, you know, like I can make my contact available, and you know, I send a gajillion workshops or conversations or spaces, or, you know, to anyone that I think would make sense for it. So I would like to echo that. And then, you know, I'm going to butcher how this was said, but I have a wonderful mentor who also works within the health and wellness space and the mental wellness space. And he started this thing called Play. And one of the things that he said was, you know, during this pandemic, and, you know, a study was shown through the Canadian Heart Association that between the last 2 years, you know, the increase in death due to heart disease it tripled in, you know, numbers. And it was shown that it was due to, you know, the physical condition of the heart. And one of the biggest things that affects the physical condition of the heart, besides obviously the working mechanics, is the mental aspect of how we hold our heart. And one of the things that, you know, solves, you know, and improves the condition of our heart is play. And, you know, and I was just like, and he asked me, he was like, when was the last time you played? You know, when was the last time, you know, Amanda, in your 29 years, did you play? And I actually had to really think about that, you know, because I was like, I have no idea. And he was like, you know, we are creating a space for, you know, youth and young adults to just play. And he put together a study of, just that simple concept of allowing yourself to have fun, giving yourself that permission to play, in essence, giving yourself that moment to have fun and to indulge and to feel pleasure. And, that is, easier said than done, but that is something that I can say that, finding those personal outlets to allow yourself to play and allow yourself to feel, enjoyed in something that you are contributing to yourself does wonders.
Yeah. Something else that I'll add, just to kind of validate the youth in the space, whether they're going through this or not. Normally, when youth enter high school, be middle school to high school, they're going through puberty. So while you're going through puberty, your body is changing, your mind is changing. So some of that is just your physical changes that you're going through naturally, and then it's coupled with the fact that you now are dealing with COVID and COVID's depression and anxiety. And also, I would say, don't be so hard on yourself, because a lot is going on in body and mind, and some of that is just biology. Right. So I would say be easy on yourself, learn to take breaks. And I would echo what Amanda's saying, learn to play, learn to get outside, and, find ways to exercise. And even during your class time, instead of sitting down for the hour, stand up sometimes. So there's really just little small things you could do just to promote personal self-care.
Mm-hmm. And, the last thing I'm going to add, and this is probably, something that's kind of echoed throughout all of us, everything that we've been saying, it is okay to ask for help. We in this moment, in particular with the pandemic, I think has shown us is that we are not supposed to have it all together all the time. And, the concept of outreach, and a lot of what we do is to try to preserve our integrity of, it's okay, I got it, it's fine, on to the next day. That is how we are, brought up, and that is kind of, the systems and kind of oppression that we have faced. But, that is something that we have to kind of completely dismantle, which is a whole nother conversation. But it is about, outreaching. If you feel like you need to, do not feel bad for taking care of yourself by asking for help.
Yes. And I would say just break the barriers of the social norms that are put on you. You know what I mean? I think that's super, super important. Go ahead, Thompson.
No, it's funny. Before the chat, Jasper and I were having a conversation, and I was just saying to him, that I'm revisiting how I interact with my social media. And I know for me particularly, I've started or restarted again, trying to do some intermittent fasting. But along with that, I've actually added social media to it. So while I'm fasting, I'm also not, able to look at, for me, my poison of choice is Instagram, and just the rabbit holes that you go down there. And so I'm curious, especially right now, because part of it is we have more time, than we used to, right? I'm on social media mainly because, well, I'm not doing as many things as I was doing because I've been kind of forced inside. And so maybe there's some, you have some insights about just really kind of managing the time spent there. That's not a kid thing. That's an adult thing too. We all do it. We get down these rabbit holes of things that, really, one, are wasting our time, but two, are just, I would say, are seem like entertainment, but back to Amanda's point about the heart piece, it's making your heart race, right? You're getting all worked up on these things. So what are maybe some strategies actually to try and unplug, and how that limits some of the impact that might be on you?
Oh, that is such a difficult question. I am so in love with TikTok, and it is so dangerous. And I work in marketing, right? So, I am glued to screens more than I think I should be. But, I understand, and I know, and we've talked about it in a few program sessions, the comparison that we do, while we are on our phone, in this pandemic, and how dangerous that can be. We have 30 seconds to glance at something that, someone is doing, eating, saying, being with, and the cogs in our brain are kind of, starting to draw this comparison of maybe what we're doing and where we're at. And, there is this kind of idea that we need to somehow achieve this or not achieve it, but be better. And it is a really, and it is a really scary narrative. But one of the things that, I try to look at, and this is how, I've heard the term of like, social media fasting, is, am I on social media for joy? Am I on social media for boredom? Am I on social media for work? And I kind of try to categorize what I am doing with my time in those specific, realms. And it has helped. It has helped, when I know that I'm on it for work and I'm on the clock. When I am bored, that is when I am, trying to fill space and trying to fill time. And when I realize I am doing that, what can I do outside of that? Am I neglecting something that, I'm just pushing off to the side, i.e. the dishes that I'm looking right behind me that need to be touched? Am I, not taking my dog out for the walk because it is freezing outside? Like, I'm asking my questions that, like, am I avoiding something? And then for sheer entertainment, like, it can be such a center of joy and creativity. And I think if you can think of why you are doing it, it makes it easier to not do it if you don't feel comfortable or, settled for why you are doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. Well, I actually have found that with the fasting that I've been doing, I've been learning that I eat because I'm bored, especially sitting in front of and I have a sweet tooth. I really like cookies, chocolate chip, peanut butter chocolate chip, oatmeal chocolate chip.
Is that a hint?
Yeah, Oreos. Yeah, it's all. Greg, sorry, you were going to say something.
I think I agree, but I think we're living in a generation where we all have access to more screen time, whether it be for work or play or school. So some of the things that I help remind youth about is, if you see yourself getting a headache, if you see like your vision is now being impacted, right? If you see yourself having watery eyes. So just reminding people to take deliberate breaks, because you are having probably physical signs that's telling you like you've been on the phone or the screen too long. And I think one important fact that's really gendered based is that girls are spending way more time online. They're logging on at the moment they wake up and logging off just before they go to bed, right? So just really finding time to deliberately to turn the device off. So I would say, I tell people, like, take a recess from your phone, literally put it in another room, and just try to do something other than use your phone, even if it's deliberately for like an hour or so. But just try to get into the place where you realize, you know what, you don't have to be attached to your phone and or social media so much. And don't use social media to validate your feelings or your self-esteem, because sometimes, the comments that you read could be so detrimental to your mental health, where, again, it's important to get validation, but do those people really know you intimately to really give an opinion, right? And sometimes those opinions are far more detrimental than they are positive and progressive. So just, who are you talking to? People who really know you, or someone that's just lending an opinion, right? So sometimes it's important to get those opinions that are said to you validated by somebody that truly knows you, where it could be, you know what, I was online and someone said this to me. And then you're asking someone that's been in your life, for an amount of time to say, what do you think about this? So that it could probably bring you back down to earth, So that's what I would say about it.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. It's, do I feel bad doing this? Are you walking away feeling worse about yourself, or self-conscious about yourself, or, doubting yourself, through this? It goes the same with, fasting or dieting. Are you feeling bad, while doing this, or, are you feeling, good, fulfilled, and, is there an enjoyment, not that it is embedded in your self-worth.
Yeah, wonderful. You know what, I think it's a great time maybe for us to kind of just open up some questions. to our youth committee. Normally we have a youth committee member who starts it off, but I think we're just going to open it up. We really appreciate everyone who's been here, Greg and Amanda, and we're going to actually ask Kathryn to join us as well and see if there's any questions of the youth of any of our panelists. And feel free to either unmute or pop it in the chat if that's where you feel most comfortable.
Hi, I just had a question for Greg and Amanda as well. Also, just love the advice that you both are giving. My question for Greg is, what advice would you give to those who are currently having a hard time staying motivated in school or online school, especially during this pandemic, and the recent lockdown? So just wanted to start off with that, and then I'll ask Amanda afterwards.
Okay, so in regards to motivation, I think motivation is something that comes from inspiration. So I know with school, there's been so much change. I think with each lockdown, we're learning a bit more. And I think that's what adds to it. You never really could plan for what next. So I would say it's in situations like this, you have so much reason to be sad or to kind of just throw your hands up and say, you know what, forget it, I can't keep up with this, right? So I think the word that I would use is, be goal focused. Give yourself small goals where, for example, I know some schools are doing 2 classes a week and then every other week they're changing. So I'm not sure what model you're on. So I would think ways in really being focused and staying motivated is really just setting small goals for yourself. And those small goals could be, I'm going to log on today and participate in that class. And I know, what helps a lot of youth is using the Google Classroom just to stay on top of really what classes you have, handing in marks in. And I know the school board would never tell you this, but you are able to hand in your work even after the fact. If they say the due date is, say, for example, Monday, and you hand it in Friday, you're allowed to, right? They may take away some marks. So I would say don't be discouraged when you are given a due date and you miss the deadline. Just hand it in and knowing that, you're doing your best. And don't be so hard on yourself. I think staying motivated is really around setting realistic goals. That's what I'm saying, set small goals. If it means I woke up and I logged on and I participated, that might be enough for you to say, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing tomorrow. And I think those little small things you do add up and multiply to big things. So just start small and they grow. They grow. And I would say don't be hard on yourself. There's days that I drop the ball and I'm not my greatest self, but I think that's okay, because I think that there's so much for us to kind of throw our hands up and be sad about that, no one would blame you, right? So I would say don't be so hard on yourself. And the fact that you're here today is a form of motivation, because you're willing to take advice from us, the adults, and collectively hear from each other. So 2 thumbs up for you.
I love that. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I completely agree with the baby steps and just taking it slow and little goals is, I love it. Okay. Sorry. So my second question for Amanda is, you mentioned the feeling of guilt when we're mentioning our own mental state or talking about it. I just wanted to know, how do we overcome this guilty feeling or sorry feeling for maybe our own mental health, and how do we overcome this?
Thank you for your question. It's a really great question. I don't know. I don't know if this is necessarily the step of taking or getting over your guilt, but it goes back to not feeling bad because you have this guilt. It is, condition yourself, not to feel that you shouldn't be feeling this. And I know that doesn't necessarily directly answer your question, but it is about acknowledging and being able to sit in the room with what you are feeling. And that is I think that is one of the things that is the most uncomfortable thing to do. We do so many things to push away everything. But, finding that, that courage within yourself to, I'm going to sit in the room with my depression. I am going to sit in my room with my anger. I am going to sit there and I'm going to look at it. And I am not, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to push it away. I'm not going to let it sit on me. We're going to be sitting, eye to eye, same level. And I am going to work my hardest to feel comfortable with being able to acknowledge and to sit in the room and shake the hand with, whatever you are feeling. And it is also about, not putting pressure on yourself to feel bad about that stuff. It goes hand in hand. You should not feel bad about, feeling, what we are kind of all feeling, or, you may not know that, but, it is about feeling you reassured that what you are going through, whatever it may be, is, the characteristics of being human. And it is the most complicated thing, and no one writes a textbook about it. Nobody, but nobody gives you a handbook to say, this is how you do it, manual A to B, this is how you build it, and it's good to go. There is no such thing, and that is okay. And you have to just be reassured that it is okay. And whatever it is, you are in the presence of it, and you own it, and you got it, and you're. And that's what it is. And it is easier said than done, but I think it takes the step by having confidence in you, in whatever you're feeling. And having that confidence doesn't necessarily mean that I am happy, or I'm feeling good today. It's confidence that you are mad, you're tired, like it is whatever it is. And that's how I would at least acknowledge, the guilt, or that nagging feeling that what you're feeling is bad.
Yeah, if I could add, Amanda, I echo everything you said, but I think sometimes it's also important to recognize, as I talked about earlier, that COVID has led us to be facing trauma. And when you talk about guilt is a symptom of trauma. So is irritability, so is anger, so is anxiety, so is shame, right? So is self-blame. So some of what you're going through is symptoms of COVID and the impact that it has on us. So it's just really to have this open conversation that we're having to let you know that, what, some of these feelings that you have is what we'd call transference based on the environment and time that we're living in, right? So I like the fact that you are open and honest and sharing, but some of that is not just you. Some of that is all of us dealing with it, but some of us are not willing to name and label it. So good on you, and knowing that, what, this is something that you could continue to get through because you now understand kind of what you're going through and the reasons kind of behind it, is what I would say.
I'd love to chime in too, just quickly, if I might, just because I would love to just share something that's actually really worked for me during this experience is, one, acknowledging my own self-talk. I think that's something really important to figure out how you speak to yourself, and in acknowledging those feelings is also how you talk to yourself through them. So something that I just wanted to share, that every day I start my day by just checking in with myself and having a moment to start my day and feel, have a bit of a gratitude practice. And I know a lot of people talk about that, but it's something that actually really works for me. I start my day, I go outside, or I look outside, and I just try to set the tone for my day based on checking in with myself and having a bit of a pep talk, and just being real with myself and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to go with the flow today. Today may be a great day. Maybe it won't. If I need to be kind to myself. If I feel low energy, or I'm feeling whatever waves that are coming with this experience we're all going through in our own capacities, to just be like, you know what? Today might be a harder day. And if that's the case, that's okay. Tomorrow is a new day. And just being cognizant of the narrative that's happening in your own head, and acknowledging that, and just, like we keep saying this whole conversation, is being kinder to yourself. And I know that you know, different phases of your life, that's a bit of a learning curve in terms of, you know, recognizing those emotions and how you tune into them and how you acknowledge them and how you speak to them. But that was just a little piece that I wanted to share.
I think that's great, Kathryn. You know, it's interesting if you think about if we compare it to a professional athlete. So a lot of people think about their morning rituals, how they get started. You know, a professional athlete would never walk into a game cold. They would never walk in not having warmed up, not having stretched. So, you know, if you think about starting your day off, regardless of what it is, if it's going to school or things like that, you know, what are those things that are going to really help you just prepare? What are those things that are going to help you move from, you know, you're getting awake to, okay, now I've set the tone for the day, and I know that there'll be things that may happen. And, you know, if those things happen, I'm going to give myself permission to step away, turn the screen off, you know, and give myself that space and acknowledge that what's going on. So I think those are great suggestions, great advice, and really great different, I think, ways for us to look at what is going on. And I think also different ways for us to actually just look at, you know, what things are happening with some of our peers. I think Amanda, with with the guilt that you talk about, which is, hey, maybe things have actually been going well for you. And now that's starting to play tricks on your mind, which is, hey, everyone seems to be having a hard time, but I seem to have kind of skated through this. So it may not be now, but I think some of these tools, especially with the work, you know, if we think about some of the work that you're doing at Unison, which is that there will be periods in time where there will be challenges. And so if it's not COVID for you today, maybe something else tomorrow. Jasper, I see you have a question.
Yes, sir. I have a question for all three of you. Something that was coming into my mind was you're talking about loneliness and feeling alone. And sometimes when we have problems, we feel really alone in those problems. For instance, you know, at certain points in my artistic career, it's like, you know, having some really tough moments financially, you know, looking at Kathryn's work, and it's like, at what point do I ask for some help there? Or do I reach out to Unison? Like, I'm right at that edge, but, you know, oh no, it's not that bad. Or, you know, I might talk myself away from that. Or, you know, looking at Greg, and it's like, I could really use some counseling. I need to talk to someone about a familial situation that's really, but you know, I feel so alone. I don't know how to reach out to that person. Or I look at, you know, the SAG Collective. How do I surround myself with people who are so positive? I want to be part of that movement, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of advice would you give to anybody in this who's listening here, who is kind of right at that edge and needs to take that next step, or a baby step or a large step, to ask for help in each of your sectors, who might not have the courage to?
I can start, I guess. I mean, hopefully having opportunities like this to actually see who's on the other end and get a feeling for who you're going to speak to, hopefully helps. I've definitely done a lot of outreach to people in my community who either weren't aware of it, and or, like you said, Jasper, nervous about it, and just reassured them that it is confidential, and that, like, you know, we are truly here to help, and that it is a safe space. But at the end of the day, like, it's in your best interest. You know, this is a tool you're giving yourself to get to the next part of your life, right? And yes, I know asking for help is hard, but imagine what can be on the other side of that if you do.
Yeah, and I guess that, you know, echoing that, and just also saying, you know, from like SAG Collective standpoint, you know, it was birthed from heartbreak, and, you know, when we were in the worst states of our life, you know, like, it was not, you know, it wasn't formed because we, you know, we were happy and we were like, yeah, let's do it. It was formed from, you know, how Greg was, trauma, you know, it was formed from the most amount of trauma, and it was a way of bonding, you know, our trauma together, but also collectively healing. And so I would say that, you know, Jasper, to just see even your first point, you know, if you are pondering, you know, just even pondering, that usually is an indication that you want to talk about it. You know, that is an indication that, you know, it is not a silent thought. And you know, it depends on the avenue and, you know, what it is. You know, obviously we have the clinical advice and the, you know, the professionals who, you know, are, you know, capable and, you know, trained to deal with that. But, you know, it doesn't hurt to, you know, reach out. And, you know, I think one of the fears of reaching out is the concept, you know, A, of rejection, and then B, of judgment, of not, you know, it being reciprocated or understood, or, you know, worried that our friends or peers, you know, will have a thought, you know, that isn't, you know, just 100% support. Or sometimes we don't know what we want as a response. You know, we don't know what we are looking for by, you know, reaching out. But, you know, I have to say that every time that I've reached out that I desperately needed help, I did not regret, you know, in one bit. And it, you know, it was from financial, it was from, you know, from safety, it was for advice, it was for decisions. You know, there wasn't a point of regret where I was my most vulnerable self because I needed help. Um, and, you know, I think it also, you know, takes, you know, courage, and, you know, that is something to be kind for yourself, and to be, you know, put gratitude into yourself that you know, were just able to even acknowledge that and then able to vocalize it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I would add, I think, thank you guys both for sharing. I would say in my experience personally and professionally, there is a sense of fear. And I think most importantly, most people are worried about stigma and being
Mhm.
labeled, right? But I think with that comes, once you are able to unpack what's going on, I agree with Amanda. It's so reassuring. I could think of myself in 2005, um, when through my work, a lot of the clients that I was working with died as a result of gun violence or accident. And I was so impacted by that that I didn't realize that I was being burnt out. And then my work was telling me, we need you to take some time off, but in order to do so, you have to see a psychologist. But I was so worried about being labeled with mental health, or like somebody telling me that something was wrong. But then I had the courage to do it. And in so doing, I learned so much about myself and my vulnerabilities, and it helped me to get better. And I think if I had sat in that, I knew I would have been worse, right? So just having the confidence to trust someone, whether it be a friend, a parent, a peer, that's going to honor what you're saying and be not judgmental, and keep the information in confidence is going to be helpful, because there are those opportunities that you do share something that it can be harmful and damaging, right? So I would say really suss out whom you're going to be telling. I think if it's a professional, in most cases, they should be responsible and treat that information as delicate. If it's a friend, ensure that you know that they're able to be good gatekeepers, and they're good listeners, and they're going to impart something to you that is worthy of helping you to be better, because sometimes we do need that hand holding to get through particular situations. But I could speak for myself in saying that from 2005 until now, I've kept a therapist or kept someone in my life to be able to say, you know what, I'm not at my best self, and this is kind of what's going on, and in every instance has been helpful, right? So I maybe it's something that I adhere to and administer in my life now because I benefited from it. But I would challenge anyone to seek it out and try it for themselves, and to hear that different voice speak to them in such a way that gives them helping information.
I had
Thank
a
you.
quick note just to
Yeah.
add to that, just because it's a conversation I've been having a lot about even just the stigma of asking for help, or talking to a psychiatrist or psychologist or whoever it is, a professional that you speak with, that like there seems to be still this idea that you only go to those people if you have a massive problem, when it's too big, when it's already happened, versus like being proactive. Where for myself, I personally can say I see somebody and I'm very grateful for, but it's to keep me on a regular, consistent path versus waiting for something massive to happen. It helps to sort of get ahead of anything being bigger than it needs to be. And so I've been just having a lot of conversations about just people like assuming that, oh, you only go talk to somebody because you have a massive problem. It's like, well, what about getting ahead of it?
Nice.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add to Greg's point around the stigma, and also just going back to the guilt of, sometimes and a lot of times we think that we are being a burden, for, seeking peer support, friend support, family support. We are automatically in that moment, and this is something the other member of SAD Collective, we talk about a lot. In that moment, we are so fixated on how someone else is going to feel, and we have completely dismissed how we are going to feel when we were the ones who wanted to talk about it in the first place. And one of the things that we also talk about within SAD Collective, your friends and your chosen family and your family, they will be the ones to tell you if they have space or if they don't have space to hold what you are going through. And it is something that more or less we are quite vocal in, and even if we don't think so, don't, once again, don't let that guilt or the concept that what you are feeling can or will trouble someone in that sense, because we don't know and we can't create those expectations always, and in particular with professional and trained individuals.
I think
Nice.
that's great, Amanda. It's interesting. I think sometimes when asking, especially when it's your peer group, not to assume that they're not actually going through something themselves, and you asking them actually allows them to actually unlock some of the things that they're going, and so it can be a mutually healing opportunity for the both of you. We are coming up close to time, but I want to make sure that I address if there's any last burning questions that that anyone has. Please speak now, or Jasper will follow up if you are part of the youth committee, so that there'll always be an opportunity for you to speak to someone or get resources. If I don't see anyone, which is totally fine as well, I just wanted to thank Greg, Kathryn, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all the inspiring work that you're doing in the city, and thank you for sharing your insights. And we hope to have you back for future talk about some of the work that you're doing. Please, everyone, youth committee, we will see you next week, or Jasper will anyways. And stay tuned. Tamala's going to put up the social medias in the chat. Thank you, Simone and Tamala, for supporting this event like always. Thanks, Stephanie and Jasper, for bringing this series to life behind the scenes like always. And this is, I say this every time, but each talk gets better and better. Please check back with the YouTube channel as well as Every Little Voice podcast, and for previous RPSM talk recordings. Make sure to RSVP for the next one happening March 3rd at 7 p.m. You can RSVP for that talk on other RPSM events at rpmusic.org/events. Thanks again. This concludes this evening on Thompson Egbo-Egbo. It's been a pleasure. We're going to leave you with a song called Why Don't You by Cleo Soul. Until next time, take care and be good.